Humans shared the Americas with an apex predator built like a tank and armed with foot-long fangs for over 15,000 years. Not a rare encounter, and not a myth either. 15,000 years of direct overlap, generation after generation, on the same continent, hunting the same herds, sleeping under the same open sky. So how did anyone survive that long next to something with teeth that size? Picture this scene for a second. You're crouched near a fresh kill, finally getting some meat after days of nothing. A low growl comes from somewhere behind you, close. You turn around slowly. Standing there is something roughly the size of a modern lion, watching, deciding whether you're worth the effort. Run, and it'll catch you eventually. Stand still, and it might lose interest. Fight, and those teeth are the very last thing you'll ever see clearly. There's no good option here. There never really was. Now imagine that wasn't a nightmare at all. Imagine that was just an ordinary Tuesday, for thousands of years, across 2 entire continents. The animal in question is Smilodon, the one you know as the saber-toothed tiger. Humans arrived in the Americas by at least 26,000 years ago. Smilodon didn't disappear until roughly 10,000 years ago. 15,000 years is longer than the entire span of recorded human civilization. This overlap was just background noise for it. It wasn't fast, for what it's worth. Forget the cartoon image of it chasing prey across open plains. It didn't need to be fast. Built like a linebacker, short, powerful limbs, a body designed for one thing: ambush and overpower at close range, then a single, precise bite to finish the job. An adult could weigh over 400 pounds, roughly comparable to a modern lion, but stockier, lower to the ground. Not a chase, a takedown, which meant the entire human survival strategy against it had almost nothing to do with speed and almost everything to do with never being caught in the open in the first place. Not through one clever trick, through the same layered strategy that shows up again and again whenever humans face a predator they can't outmuscle. Avoidance first, then knowledge, then, eventually, a very careful kind of confidence. Avoidance came first, and it looked a lot like common sense. Don't linger near a fresh kill that isn't yours. Don't sleep in the open near dense brush, the exact terrain a Smilodon would use to get close before an ambush. Stick together. A lone human was a much easier target than a group, and the fossil record backs this up in an unexpected way. Bones from Brea Tar Pits in modern-day Los Angeles, where more than 2,500 individual Smilodon skeletons have been recovered, suggest these cats weren't loners at all. Researchers have found specimens with severe injuries, hip dysplasia, healed fractures, that would have made solo survival essentially impossible. One individual had a hip condition so severe it couldn't have hunted on its own as an adult. It survived anyway, for years by the look of the healed bone. Something else fed it. Smilodon lived and hunted in social groups, sharing food with weaker members the way a pride of lions might. Think about what that meant for early humans. You weren't just avoiding a lone ambush predator. In many cases, you were avoiding a coordinated group of them, animals that could call on backup you never saw coming. A wounded lone predator is a problem you might solve with numbers and noise. A coordinated group defending an injured member? That doesn't back down. So avoidance meant reading terrain the way a Smilodon would read it, and staying out of the spots it liked best. Dense brush, rock cover, anywhere a heavy ambush predator could get within a few strides before you noticed it was even there. Communities that survived generation after generation passed that knowledge down deliberately, the same way any group teaches its children which mushrooms are safe to eat. You learned this as a child, from someone who'd learned it from someone else, going back further than anyone in the group could actually remember. Where you slept mattered just as much as where you hunted. Elevated ground, open sight lines, a defensible perimeter with the fire positioned to light up the most likely approach. Cave sites used repeatedly across generations tend to share specific features. A single, easily watched entrance, high ground nearby for a lookout, proximity to water without sitting directly beside the dense cover that water attracts. That's the accumulated result of a community testing which camps got attacked and which didn't, and choosing to remember the difference. Move somewhere new, and you started that entire trial and error process over again from scratch, with no guarantee the lessons from the last camp would transfer cleanly to unfamiliar terrain. Fire mattered too, and not in some vague, symbolic way. Large cats are cautious around open flame and unfamiliar light. Keep a fire going through the night, and you've turned the most dangerous hours into something closer to manageable. What did that actually take, though? A rotation. Someone stayed awake, fed the fire, watched the tree line, while others slept, probably timed loosely to the position of the stars since nobody had a clock, a smartphone, or an alarm to hand off the shift. Nobody tells campfire stories about the person who sat up all night feeding branches into a fire so nobody got eaten. That unglamorous work, repeated by different members of the group for thousands of consecutive years, kept more people alive than any single act of bravery ever did. What about actual weapons, though? Not just terrain and timing. For decades, archaeologists pictured early Americans hunting dangerous megafauna with the atlatl, a spear thrower that adds serious range to a throw. Recent chronological analysis has actually challenged that picture for this earliest period specifically, suggesting hunters relied on thrusting spears and javelins instead, weapons that demanded getting considerably closer to genuinely dangerous prey. Worse news for early hunters, in some ways. But it reframes what those early strategies had to prioritize. Without the safety of extra range, terrain and timing mattered even more than the weapon itself. Corner a threat in daylight, on your terms, rather than meeting it at dusk in the brush on its terms, where every advantage belonged to the animal instead of you. A coordinated group did the rest of the work, closing whatever gap remained. Throwing from multiple angles, shouting, using fire and noise together, driving off a genuinely dangerous predator without a direct fight. This wasn't about winning a duel, it was about making the encounter expensive enough that the smarter move, for the animal, was simply to leave. Predators generally don't want a costly fight any more than you do. Make the cost visible early, and you've usually already won without throwing a single spear. Who actually did the watching, though? Not just the hunters. Survival against a threat like this required round-the-clock vigilance no single group of adults could sustain alone, night after night, for years. Predator watch duties got distributed across the whole community. Older children learning to recognize warning signs, elders passing down which sounds meant danger and which didn't. A society that survives 15,000 years next to an apex predator isn't relying purely on its strongest fighters. It's relying on every member knowing their specific role in a system built to notice trouble early, long before trouble is close enough to require a fight at all. Communication had to carry real information fast, not just volume. Vervet monkeys use entirely different alarm calls for different predators. One for eagles, one for leopards, one for snakes. Each triggering a completely different, appropriate response within a fraction of a second. Human ancestors relied on something quite similar long before complex language existed. Distinct sounds or gestures carrying specific, actionable information. A vague shout doesn't save you in an ambush. A precise one might. You'd assume an animal built around two massive killing fangs would have a devastating bite. It didn't. Research estimates Smilodon's bite force at only about a third the strength of a modern lion's. A third. So how does an animal with a weaker bite than a lion end up as one of the most feared predators in history? The jaw itself explains it. Smilodon could open its mouth to roughly 120 degrees, compared to about 65 to 70 degrees for most living cats, purely so the jaw could clear those long canines without snapping them. Trade raw crushing power for pure precision. One clean shot to the throat, using body weight and forelimb strength to hold prey still first. That detail should reshape how you picture an actual encounter. You weren't dealing with something that would maul you repeatedly. You were dealing with something built to end things in a single, calculated motion, which is arguably scarier once you actually think it through. Here's the part that shows just how far this relationship eventually traveled. Evidence from La Brea shows cut marks on Smilodon bones. Tool marks at oblique angles consistent with butchering, radiocarbon dated to around 15,200 years ago. It's some of the earliest solid evidence of humans directly processing saber-toothed cat remains in the Americas. Whether that meant hunting them outright or scavenging carcasses after natural death is still debated. La Brea functioned as what researchers call a carnivore trap. A large herbivore would wander into the sticky asphalt and get stuck, its distress drawing in predators who then got stuck too. It only took one major entrapment event every decade or so, over roughly 30,000 years, to account for the thousands of carnivore fossils found there. At most healthy ecosystems, herbivores vastly outnumber predators. Not at La Brea. There, roughly 90% of mammal fossils recovered are carnivores. Backwards from how nature is supposed to work. The trap kept broadcasting an easy meal to anything within smelling distance, predator after predator, for 30,000 years straight, the Pleistocene equivalent of a scam email that somehow still gets clicked every single time. Humans may have simply learned to recognize the signs, a struggling animal, circling scavengers, and wait at a safe distance for the trap to finish the job on its own. By the time this evidence was left behind, humans weren't just cowering from this animal, they'd learned to treat it as a resource. That shift tells you something concrete about what 15,000 years of accumulated knowledge bought a community. You don't butcher an animal like that with makeshift tools and no plan. You need real technology, real numbers, and a working understanding of how the animal behaves, where it rests, when it's vulnerable. There's evidence that some early peoples in the Americas may have gone further than butchering, actually recording what this predator looked like. A pictograph found in Arizona has been interpreted by some researchers as a possible depiction of Smilodon, showing an animal with a spotted coat and distinctive facial features unlike anything in the modern American landscape. Try to picture that scene for a second. Whoever made those marks had almost certainly seen the animal alive, close enough to note the coat pattern and the shape of its face, and lived to tell someone else about it afterward. Not hunted in that moment, not run from it, just look closely enough and carefully enough to draw it. That's a direct eyewitness account, preserved in pigment, of an animal we otherwise only know from bones in tar. Humans weren't the only mammal that found ways to push back against threats like this, and looking at other species helps put the human strategy in perspective. Mongooses and opossums independently evolved genuine biochemical resistance to unrelated venomous predators entirely through their own separate evolutionary paths. No shared ancestry, no borrowed solution, just similar pressure producing similar defenses. Nature arriving at the same design patent twice without either species filing first. Humans never had that option against Smilodon. Nothing about human biology changed to resist a bite from an animal like that. What evolved instead wasn't biological, it was cultural. Terrain reading, fire discipline, group coordination, passed forward fast enough across generations to functionally replace what other species solved with their own bodies. There's a seasonal layer to all of this that's easy to overlook. Smilodon, like most large predators, followed its prey, and its prey moved with the seasons, following water and grazing land as the climate shifted through the year. The danger wasn't constant. It ebbed and flowed with the same rhythms that governed the rest of a hunter-gatherer's calendar. Which months were actually the dangerous ones? Almost certainly whenever the big herds concentrated near reliable water, since that's exactly where an ambush predator would concentrate too. Communities that survived long-term built a working seasonal map, tracking the herds that both fed them and fed the thing that could kill them, refined and retested by every generation that inherited it. This wasn't only an American problem either. In Europe, a different saber-tooth predator called Homotherium held on for far longer than scientists originally assumed, with a jawbone pulled from the North Sea, radiocarbon dating to just 28,000 years old. That means Homotherium was alive during the exact window when Neanderthals were spread across the continent. Genetic research has shown that Smilodon and Homotherium, despite both being called saber-toothed cats, actually diverged from each other around 18 million years ago. Not close cousins. Two separate lineages that independently evolved strikingly similar weapons, on different continents, because ambush predation with oversized canines apparently just works. Evolution found the same brutal solution twice, which meant two entirely different sets of human ancestors, an ocean apart, ended up solving strikingly similar survival problems using strikingly similar tools. What did this animal actually look like up close? In 2020, prospectors searching for mammoth tusks in Siberian permafrost found something nobody expected. A saber-toothed cat cub, mummified, preserved for 37,000 years, complete with fur, whiskers, and claws still intact, better preserved than some leftovers you've forgotten about in your own freezer. It died at just 3 weeks old. For the first time, scientists weren't just looking at bones and guessing. They were looking at an actual saber-toothed kitten, frozen at the exact moment its life ended, tens of thousands of years before anyone would dig it up and finally see what its species really looked like walking around. At a site in Siegsdorf, Germany, researchers found a 48,000-year-old cave lion skeleton, a different but comparably dangerous predator, with a puncture wound in its rib matching a wooden thrusting spear. That's the earliest confirmed instance of a large predator kill in human history. A thrusting spear means close range, though. Close range against a predator that size means overwhelming numbers, real surprise, or both. Researchers examining the wound angle think it was likely delivered while the animal was vulnerable, possibly cornered, rather than during a head-on confrontation. Even the earliest confirmed evidence of humans killing a big cat wasn't a fair fight by design. Patience, positioning, picking exactly the right moment. That mattered wherever humans ran into something with teeth built for killing things their own size or larger. None of this coexistence was ever fully safe, and it's worth being honest about that. A Smilodon or Homotherium encounter gone wrong meant catastrophic injury or death, with no hospitals, no antibiotics, nothing but whatever herbal treatment a community had learned through generations of trial and error. Bite wounds from an animal with foot-long canines weren't survivable the way a smaller predator's bite might be. You respected the danger, kept your group close, or you became part of the fossil record yourself. That last option wasn't rare. It happened often enough, across thousands of years and countless individual bad decisions or simple bad luck, that it's almost certainly baked into the skeletal record in ways researchers are still working to fully identify. Let's talk about how this all ended, because the ending complicates the whole picture. Smilodon didn't disappear because humans hunted it into oblivion. The evidence points to something messier. Rapid climate change at the end of the last ice age, shrinking habitats, disappearing prey species, and increased human competition for the same resources, converging within a narrow window. Large mammal species at Brea, direwolves, ancient bison, camels, Smilodon itself, vanish from the fossil record within roughly 1,000 years of each other, somewhere between 14,000 and 13,000 years ago. That's not a decline, that's a collapse. Prey species disappeared a few hundred years before the predators that depended on them. Remove the food source first, and the animal built to hunt it doesn't last much longer after. Coyotes, meanwhile, survived the same collapse just fine. Their fossils span the full 16,000 to 10,000 year range without the same abrupt cutoff, which tells you this wasn't a blanket catastrophe. It hit specialists hardest, the animals too committed to one hunting strategy and one type of prey to adapt fast enough. Roughly the Ice Age equivalent of a company that only ever made one product right as the market moved on without it. What good is reading terrain, maintaining fire, hunting in coordinated groups, and tracking seasonal predator movement if the entire ecosystem underneath all of it collapses within a few centuries? Those strategies managed risk from a stable, predictable predator in a stable, predictable environment. Once the environment stopped being stable, the framework that had kept humans alive for 15,000 years became irrelevant almost overnight by geological standards. The thing that finally beat Smilodon wasn't a spear at all. It was the ground shifting under everything the strategy had been built around, which puts the entire arc of this story into a strange perspective. For over 15,000 years on one continent and considerably longer on another, humans and saber-toothed cats negotiated the same basic terms. Respect the danger, avoid the ambush, move in groups, keep the fire lit. Nobody won that negotiation outright. The predator went extinct, the humans kept going. No parade, no final battle, just one species still standing and one that isn't. What's easy to miss, looking back from this distance, is how ordinary that negotiation would have felt to the people actually living through it. Nobody woke up thinking about an epic standoff with an apex predator. They thought about which direction to walk today, whether the fire needed more wood, whether that rustling in the brush was worth investigating. History, from the inside, rarely feels like history. It just feels like Tuesday, over and over, until enough Tuesdays add up into something that later gets a name. So the next time you see a reconstruction of Smilodon in a museum, those massive fangs frozen mid-snarl behind glass, remember it's the animal your ancestors actually had to figure out how to live next to, for longer than most of recorded human history has even existed. They didn't have guns, they didn't have fences. They had each other. Fire kept burning through the night, careful habits passed down through generations, and just enough respect for the danger to know exactly when to walk the other way. That respect got passed down so thoroughly, generation after generation, that some faint trace of it is arguably still sitting somewhere in the back of your own head right now, in whatever makes you tense up at a low growl in the dark, even though nothing like Smilodon has walked the earth in 10,000 years. 10,000 years is nothing, biologically speaking. The wiring doesn't know the threat is gone.